The Backlog, a gamer's worst and best friend, an ever-expanding catalogue of games and wonder that at times seems insurmountable. Hey guys, I'm Zmore, the dad in DPS, and this is a series where I try to tackle the insatiable monster that is my backlog, where I confront games and rate them for your viewing pleasure. Today's game is part of an incredibly famous gaming series, and that would be the Tales series. So sit back, relax, and it's time to talk about Tales of Arise. Tales of Arise is set on the dystopian world of Dana, a planet ruled by the cruel and heartless Renans, who are an alien race from the sister world of Rena, who rule on high from an artificial moon or space station called Lenegus. This is all after the invasion of Dana 300 years prior to the start of the game. Now the world is divided into 5 regions, each ruled by a lord, who all compete in the crown contest. The winner? They are crowned the ruler of the Renans, and this is repeated every 10 or so years. It's at this point you take control of our main character, known in the beginning of the game as Iron Mask, a mysterious figure who quite literally wears an iron mask, and in the common anime JRPG trope, has lost all memories. Now unfortunately, he is also a slave in the region Calaglia, a harsh burning environment more akin to a literal hell than a place people should actually live. And it's your mission to free yourself and all Danans from the repugnant grip of the Renans. Now, obviously, I am not going to give you a complete and utter rundown of the entire story. I mean, what would be the point in you playing it if I just tell you everything? But what I will say about Tales of Arise's story is that if you're familiar with JRPGs and anime, you will be right at home with this game. I won't pretend it's a literary masterpiece, but it doesn't disappoint, and it will scratch that JRP itch that you suffer from at times like I do. Now, there's a massive amount of optional cutscenes and dialogue that the game doesn't force you to take part in, but they'll pop up and be triggered by button presses. So if you are interested in what the characters are thinking about a particular situation, about the area, or just each other, you can access that in an optional manner, which I quite like, because if you don't want to, listen to a huge amount of exposition and dialogue, it gives you the option to skip it by just not interacting with it. Now, because of this, the main cast can be quite well fleshed out, and that's all if you give them the time to speak about their thoughts, hopes, dreams, trauma, which there's a lot of in this game, and yeah, it's pretty decent characters and really good and interesting backstories. But what I will say that on the surface, these characters follow the basic tropes that you would expect from the type of RPG it is, and there is deeper context and deeper meaning to their actions, but you won't get that unless you take the time and listen to these cutscenes. So I will say that while it gives you the option to just ignore them and skip them, you're probably best not doing that if you're really wanting to get invested in the story. As with all that, when it comes to the actual story and how I felt it stacked up from beginning to end, I wasn't overly shocked or surprised at any of the game's twists and turns. I saw 90% of how the story was going to unfold as more context was added. You're not going to immediately start playing the game and go, I know exactly what's going to happen. As the story progressed, I was like, oh, this is what's going to happen next. This character's going to do this thing's going to happen here, this is what's going to happen. Most of it was pretty obvious and, not badly written, but just, I knew where the story was going. I've seen so many things kind of like it in the past. But at the same time, it was pleasant. I enjoyed the story and the characters for the most part. And when it comes to the optional cutscenes, I watched pretty much every one that I could. And I got a lot of context and a lot of information about the characters, and I grew to really enjoy the interactions between them. What I will say is that they are incredibly talky, these cutscenes, and they're done in an almost comic book manner. So it's good if you're not really into talky stuff, but I like exposition. I like reading big factoid sheets about information about characters. So having this in the form of kind of dialogue option was quite good for me. But, if you're not into that, the good news is you can ignore it. So the next point I'm going to cover is the game's world and graphics. So if you're familiar with JRPGs, typically they take on a more anime style, and obviously more modern games have a more realistic visuals like the Final Fantasy VII remakes. But Arise looks like a playable anime. Simply put, the game world is incredibly vibrant, colourful and striking, and the landscapes seem larger than life, and each of the different areas you venture into has their own theme and aesthetic, adding to this absolutely gorgeous and visually stunning game. This is also seen in the character design. Now, with most anime-inspired and JRPG type things, the characters that you don't interact with much from the main story and just general NPCs in the background are very bland and very plain. But in turn, as you would expect, all the main cast are heavily ornate and well designed, and you can easily play the game of who's going to have voice lines when you play this game. Now, this heavily designed aspect also applies to various enemies or Zoogles you encounter throughout the game, each of these creatures having at times very complicated and frankly really Japanesey kind of designs, but you know, quite a cool aesthetic. There's a lot of things in this game that are very grand and stunning and, you know, spanning, and you look at the backgrounds, everything. It's just a very pretty game. Granted, if you're not into this heavily cartoony anime style, it could seem a little bit much, but I really enjoy the landscapes, I really enjoy the character designs, and I really enjoy the creature designs. And overall, it just adds up to this incredibly visually stunning game. Albeit not everyone's style, but if you love games like Persona, Breath of Fire, Final Fantasy, you will feel right at home in Tales of Arise. Now, before I forget, because I always forget certain things like soundtrack and little tidbits, the soundtrack for the game is absolutely stellar. Like, I enjoyed it throughout the entire existence of the game. Everything about it was just very good for setting the tone and the atmosphere. There are some really big banger tracks in there, and I think you need to play the game to really get to experience them the way that they're intended. So I think the people that were in charge of designing the soundtrack and the songs for the game were absolutely fantastic. And on top of that, there were some story and plot moments in the game that were enhanced by essentially fully animated sequences in the form of anime. And these segments of the game were absolutely fantastic as well. Really added to the atmosphere, really drew me in whenever they popped up. So yeah, if you ever get the chance to watch them, I would recommend you do in their entirety, because I enjoyed them thoroughly as well. Now, the next section we move on to is obviously about gameplay, which is the kind of most important thing when it comes to a game. Is it fun? Did you enjoy it? That kind of thing. Now, when it comes to the gameplay in Tales of Arise, it's what you'd expect from a JRPG. You traverse the game environment, interact with characters, progress through the game and story by reaching certain objectives and milestones, and taking part in battles. Now, this is where the game just doesn't really fall in line with what I like in terms of JRPGs. And that is that the objectives of the game and where you need to go at all times is incredibly clear. Like, it's glaringly obvious where you need to go at almost all instances in the game. And because of this, it feels incredibly linear and straightforward, which kills any desire to explore the game environment. Which is kind of a good thing, because outside the main objectives, there isn't a whole lot of room to actually explore in the first place. Normally in like other JRPGs, there's lots of offshoot paths, there's lots of different little towns, there's lots of different little places you can go. But in Tales of Arise, the offshoot paths just kind of lead into, you know, little jumping, like platforming areas, or looping around to a optional boss and finding items. There's really not a lot at the end of the other roads, and it's usually like a quick 2-minute journey, and then ultimately, a lot of the time, they loop back round onto the main path anyway, so you kind of end up back where you need to go. The game forces you into the right direction. And as a result, I just feel like it's forcing you to complete the story really quickly. In comparison to in some JRPGs where I could spend thousands of hours doing absolutely nothing, running around in circles, and exploring the environment and going, oh, that's a cool thing, I never saw that before, blah blah blah, yada yada yada. You know, it's a personal preference. Now, there is also side quests, and again, the side quests are quite linear. A lot of the time it's go to here, fetch thing, go to here, kill thing, come back, go there, kill thing, come back, and so on and so forth. And the items and the things that you get from these quests are usually just quite basic, you know, cosmetic items, weapons, currency, armor. You know, nothing unlocks from doing this. It's not like you do a side quest and you unlock a new strange area, or you get a house, or you get, you know, different little things. It's all very much just you get money, you get stuff, the end, move on to the next area. Now, obviously, you can't talk about the gameplay of a JRPG without addressing the combat system, and Arise goes with a style of action RPG combat, where you take control one of 4 characters that you have active and run around doing things at the one time, and your combatants build combos using arts and unleashing these kind of big devastating finishing moves once enemies have reached a certain point in the combo gauge, or with bosses if they've reached certain milestones with health. And you've got all the kind of things of dodging and, you know, parrying is the wrong word, counter-attacking, and these kind of things are all really intrinsic to the combat. You know, you need to be really watching what's going on and on the ball when you're fighting in general. On top of this, there's also special moves that you can trigger for all your available characters that act as a kind of Uno reverse card to certain enemy actions, like interrupting enemy magic, breaking through particularly armoured enemies, and blocking charges. And it's important that you keep your eye on enemies' attack patterns and movements, as well as the style of the enemy you're up against, because using these skills to your advantage to counteract, stun, and just dodge the enemies is incredibly important throughout the game, because if you're not utilising these specific mechanics of what your different characters can do for you in combat, you're going to struggle in the later game enemies and against some of the optional bosses in the game. Now, when it comes to the combat as a whole, I will say a pretty simple thing. I love turn-based RPGs. I love the old RPG systems of playing games and things like that. And as a result, I feel like as I get older, this style of combat can be a little bit frustrating. And that's maybe because my reaction speed isn't as good as it once was. But at the same time, I think it's due to certain things in the way that the mechanics work. For example, a big bugbear for the mechanics in this game is the dodge mechanic. Now, the problem with the dodge mechanic is that it cannot be triggered during an animation. So if your character is attacking, swinging, doing a bunch of different things, it can't trigger during that animation. And the problem being with that is that quite typically enemies have a very quick, what's the word, telegraphing attack. So they move quite fast, but you're in the middle of an animation where you're swinging about 5 or 6 times. And the problem with that being is if you're on swing 3 and the animation starts, you're like spamming the dodge button and you won't go anywhere. So even if you see it coming, even if you've got the speed to do it, the only way that you can guarantee that you have the speed to dodge all of the enemy's attacks is to never actually attack, which for me was a little bit frustrating. And granted, me queuing up certain things and using certain attacks and, you know, doing a load of things like that, I feel like that is my fault. It's 100% my fault, but it feels like I should be able to just interrupt my animations to dodge. It's a slight thing, you know, it's a small thing, but it would be really helpful if you could do that. On top of that, you can also take part in quite a lot of cheese mechanics, because there's a character called Rinwell, and what you can do to defeat just about any enemy that you're struggling with as a melee character, which I tried to play the whole game as the main character Iron Mask, but it just, some enemies just felt like overly punishing for melee. I'd go to Rinwell and I'd spam her attack, Air Thrust, which literally I could do from the other side of the battle arena, and then if they directed their attention at me, I could just run away from them and like dodge everything, because I could just hit them from far away, and then the second they draw any attention to me, I run away. And then once they're not attacking me again, I just keep air slashing them. And it was just a very easy way to cheese it. Now, I'll briefly go into this little part of the gameplay and the combat system that, I'm going to be honest, isn't as important as you would think it would be. Now, as you progress through the game, you build up skill points that you can use. This allows you to basically get better skills and unlock different stat buffs and complete these little skill board things that give you a stat increase if you complete them. And while that's all fine and well, and putting your points into these things that are important because it gives you like significant stat boosts as you go through the game, ultimately what I found is that the skills that you use don't really matter a lot of the time. If you never interacted with the system in the sense of equipping specific skills to use, because you can only have like 3 in each character, with an alternate button press which gives you 6 while you're on the ground and when you're in the air. It just felt like I didn't really interact with that system a lot. I changed like maybe 2 skills on the main character once, and I went through the game with very little effort. It feels like the system didn't really need me to play around with it an awful lot, outside of the fact of filling in like little slots to give myself more stat increases. It just felt like there was a lot of skills in the game, and I didn't really use a lot of them. And granted, once again, that's kinda on me. I wasn't embracing the skill system all too much, so it kind of felt a little bit wasted on me. You know, other people might disagree. Other people will certainly go, oh well, if you use these kind of skills, you're going to be absolutely overpowered and broken because you can do this and you can do that. But for me, it just felt like I was kind of just fumbling around, and it didn't really seem important to change your skills around. Again, that's just how I felt from playing it. And with that, what I'd say is the game it's got passable gameplay. I'm not saying it's the best like form of gameplay I've ever experienced in a JRPG. I've already said I prefer turn-based ones, but that is just me. And what I will say, it does make for a fun hack and slash type experience, albeit with some flaws, and whenever I got frustrated, I'd be like, bugger it, I'm just going to cheese it and use Rinwell to completely annihilate everything. On top of this, there is some endgame or later game secrets, quote unquote. There's things that you can go to in the endgame that are much higher level than the endgame boss, for example. But to get access to these types of things, you're going to have to do a lot of mindless grinding and, you know, general repetitive beating up of enemies, which is exactly what you should expect from a JRPG. So I'm not saying that's a downside or a bad aspect of it. I'm just saying that there is some endgame content that you can experience if you are willing to put the time and effort in. And that's just the nature of the game we're talking about here. Also, a last note on the gameplay is that I spent a stupid amount of time in the fishing minigame, so much so that I caught every damn fish in the game. So yeah, I've got that also going for me. Fishing minigames in Japanese games are really addicting. Now, overall, I think Tales of Arise is a great game, and it is especially something that would be good for popping on and scratching that aforementioned JRPG itch. I enjoyed the story, I enjoyed just the way that the game played in general, but I will say it was at times a little bit frustrating, and that was maybe due to my own inability to play the game properly, in the sense that some of the things I felt were not as necessarily to the actual way the game flowed. But again, that could just be all related to me and, you know, it not being my style of JRPG. And if I was going to rate the game, I'd have to give it a solid 7 out of 10. You know, despite its flaws, despite the frustration, it's a solid game. It has actually got a fun story. I really enjoyed it. And this is the thing about games. I have negative things to say about it, but overall I enjoyed the experience and I enjoyed playing it. And there's a lot of JRPGs out there that I have screamed and cried at because of things that I've said I enjoy about them. And this is the thing, just because something's frustrating doesn't mean I don't like it. And overall, I do think this is a very solid game, and yeah, I'm quite happy to have played it and to have it under the Backlogs banner now. Either way, guys, if you've enjoyed today's video, don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel and helps tell me that you enjoy this form of content and helps me to bring more in the future. Either way, guys, I'll catch you all next time in the Backlog. Through the dark, moonlight's dimly shining, a shadow creeping.
twisted mind, seeking prey to devour. In the dead of the night, he gains more power. His bloodshot